Rachel Barber was just 15 years old, bright, talented and full of promise. Known for her beauty, popularity and determination, she had one true passion: dancing. Her dream was to perform in a musical, and she was well on her way to making that a reality. But an unexpected decision changes everything. When she accepts what appears to be a simple job from someone she once knew, her life takes a tragic turn. Rachel Barber was born on September 12, 1983, in Glen Iris, a suburb southeast of Melbourne, Australia. Creativity ran deep in her family. Her grandfather was a respected writer, her mother, Elizabeth, authored children's books, and her father, Michael, designed toys. Her younger sisters had a strong interest in music, and Rachel herself was passionate about dance. Even before she was born, her mother said she seemed to respond to music. As she grew, this love for music only intensified. She spent nearly every spare moment dancing and dreamt of one day performing on stage in a musical. Her parents supported her ambitions wholeheartedly. In the early 1990s, the family moved to Mont Albert, another Melbourne suburb, to provide Rachel with better training opportunities. To help her practice more comfortably, her parents even removed the carpet from her bedroom floor. Rachel trained diligently, aspiring to one day become a dance teacher and own a studio. Over time, she gained experience performing in theatres and at events. But her intense focus on dance meant her school performance declined. Though she worried about it, studying more meant dancing less, something she couldn't imagine. So, at 15, Rachel asked to leave school and join the Dance Factory enrichment program to concentrate fully on her passion. This school had long been her dream. While her mother was initially cautious, her father quickly agreed. Elizabeth explained that Rachel would need to work temporarily, as the term at Dance Factory had already started and she couldn't enroll right away. Rachel understood and spent 2 weeks job hunting before visiting the school in person to ask if she could begin early. Impressed by her enthusiasm and talent, the school agreed. Rachel's parents gave their final approval, and she officially left school in 1998 to join the Dance Factory. By early 1999, she was 15 years old and also started modelling at the academy. Around this time, she met 16-year-old Emmanuel Carella, known affectionately as Manny. The two quickly became a couple and formed a close bond. They were nearly inseparable, meeting daily and talking on the phone each night. Her parents were glad to see their daughter happy and adjusting well at school. With her warm and outgoing personality, Rachel made friends easily and soon had a wide social circle. On the last weekend of February 1999, Rachel had a plan. Since Manny had other obligations, she decided to prepare a surprise gift for him, one she would give him that Monday. She'd bought a large purple heart-shaped pillow as a symbol of her feelings, a sweet gesture to remind him that her heart would always be with him no matter what. On February 28th, Rachel went shopping with her mother. She needed new dance pants and money was tight. Most of their budget went toward dance classes and gear. That day they also looked at kittens, as Rachel had been asking for a pet. After some persuasion, Elizabeth finally agreed, and Rachel was overjoyed. She had already chosen the name Humphrey. That evening, around 5 p.m, Elizabeth noticed Rachel on the phone, assuming she was talking to Manny as usual. Thinking little of it, the two then watched television before Rachel went to bed. The next morning, March 1st, Rachel got up, got dressed and packed the gift for Manny. She wore a blue-grey shirt, black pants and shoes, a gold necklace and matching earrings. She had plans to meet her friend Kai for breakfast before heading to school. As usual, her parents helped her with the morning commute, dropping her off at the train station on their way to work. Her father, Michael, drove her that day. In a rush, Rachel quickly told her mother she loved her before heading out. It was a moment that tragically would later become unforgettable. Michael dropped Rachel off at the Wettle Park train stop at 9:30 a.m, planning to pick her up later at 6:15 p.m. Rachel assured him she would be on time. After arriving at her friend Kylie's place, she met up with Manny and his brother Dominic. The three of them attended the dance academy together. They had breakfast, and during the visit Rachel gave Manny the heartfelt gift she had prepared, the purple pillow. Together they head to the dance academy. During class, Rachel mentions to a friend that she has an exciting opportunity lined up for the evening, one that could earn her a good amount of money. She says she'll share more details the next day. Her friend is intrigued but doesn't press further. Once school ends at 5:30 p.m, Rachel and her friends walk to the train station. On the way, she takes a moment to show Manny a pair of blue platform sneakers, reminiscent of the popular Spice Girls style. Shoes she's admired for weeks. They're eye-catching and trendy. But at nearly $100, they've been out of her budget. Manny is happy to see how much she likes them, but he's surprised when she hints that she may finally be able to afford them. He asks how that's possible, and Rachel explains she's been offered a very good opportunity. When he inquires further, she becomes vague, saying she's not really supposed to discuss it. It's from someone she used to know, she assures him, and it's completely above board. Still, her secretive tone leaves Manny puzzled. It isn't like Rachel to withhold information, especially not from him. After their conversation, they part ways. Rachel continues walking with her friend Tamara Gunn. As they stroll along Church Street toward Bridge Road, Rachel mentions she's taking a different route home and will be boarding from a different train station. Tamara offers to accompany her there, but Rachel politely declines, assuring her that her father will be picking her up from the new location. Tamara finds it a bit odd. Rachel usually travels the opposite way, but accepts her reasoning and says goodbye around 5:45 p.m. Back at home, Elizabeth begins preparing dinner. As time passes, she starts wondering why Rachel and Michael haven't arrived. But this was a time before mobile phones were common, so she can't simply call to check. With each passing minute, her concern deepens. Could something have gone wrong on the road? At 7:40 p.m, the home phone finally rings. On the line is Michael. He had gone to his parents' house to use the phone and is now also worried. Rachel hadn't been at the designated train stop when he went to pick her up. Hoping she had just missed the train, he waited for several more, but she never arrived. Michael leaves immediately. Meanwhile, Elizabeth calls the police to report her daughter missing. The officers on the phone try to reassure her, but Elizabeth is deeply concerned. She explains that Rachel is very uncomfortable in the dark. A past incident where she felt unsafe walking home at night and had to seek refuge in a nearby shop left her shaken. Since then, her parents had made sure to pick her up and drop her off every day. Elizabeth emphasizes that Rachel is not the type to leave home unexpectedly, nor would she willingly get into a car with someone unfamiliar. She also mentions that Rachel has asthma and didn't take her inhaler with her that day. Despite these concerns, the officer explains that it's not unusual for teenagers to be late or absent temporarily. He asks if there had been any arguments and gently suggests she might have chosen to stay out longer. He doesn't consider it necessary to file an official missing person report just yet, and advises checking other train stations and contacting Rachel's friends first. Her parents follow the advice. After not finding her at Camberwell station, they begin reaching out to her close friends. They soon hear from Manny about Rachel's mysterious comments earlier that day. He tells them she spoke about a job offer from someone she once knew. Her parents are shocked. This is the first they've heard of it. Elizabeth then contacts Rachel's teachers and classmates, but no one seems to know anything about this opportunity or where she could be. The only detail they have is Manny's account, that it involved an old acquaintance and was, according to Rachel, legitimate. At 8:45 p.m, Rachel's parents return to the police to officially report her missing. Though concerned, the officers maintain a calm approach. They say they'll keep an eye out for Rachel, but won't begin an active search. According to them, It's not uncommon for teenagers to be away for a few days. Rachel's parents, however, know this is out of character and begin their own search. That night, they walk the streets for hours, showing her photo and asking strangers if they've seen her. The next day, Rachel doesn't show up at school and hasn't contacted any friends. Her parents grow increasingly concerned. They print out dozens of flyers with her picture and distribute them throughout the city and nearby neighborhoods. They also reach out to their telephone provider to check the call history for their home line. Unfortunately, only outgoing calls are available and nothing unusual shows up. Undeterred, Elizabeth and Michael continue searching. They go back to the shoe store where Rachel had excitedly spoken about her favorite pair. The clerk tells them Rachel never returned to collect the shoes. They canvass nearby stores, speaking with employees and business owners. Everyone is sympathetic, but no one has seen Rachel. Some offer worrying speculations. One shopkeeper shares a recent news story she'd read about a man who, after being released from prison, was allegedly recruiting young women on the streets with promises of lucrative work. She wonders aloud if something similar could have happened to Rachel. Although Rachel's parents strongly doubt she would ever agree to such a situation, Elizabeth decides to pursue every possible lead. She contacts the establishment mentioned in the article. The person who answers is curt, stating they do not engage with underage individuals and deny any knowledge of Rachel. They provide Elizabeth with the contact details of the Victorian Prostitutes Collective, an organisation that supports and protects individuals working in the adult industry and also provides safe spaces for those in need. Elizabeth calls the organisation and speaks with a staff member. After describing Rachel, the representative says there's no record of anyone matching her description and adds that it's highly unlikely any legitimate business would involve a minor. Elizabeth thanks them and passes this information to the police. Still, the authorities don't consider this enough reason to escalate the case. 3 days into Rachel's disappearance, her parents reach out to the Missing Persons Unit and insist that a formal investigation be opened. The officers ask for a list of Rachel's friends and acquaintances, particularly female ones, since Rachel had mentioned a job offered by a female acquaintance. Elizabeth tries to recall her daughter's classmates, but struggles. She contacts Rachel's former school to ask for the names of students Rachel once knew. However, the school declines, citing privacy rules, and informs her that only law enforcement can access that information. When Elizabeth passes this back to the officers, they seem uncertain. One officer suggests she should try to relax, go home and check if Rachel might be hiding somewhere nearby. On the morning of March 4th, after another sleepless night, Elizabeth and Michael return home around 4 a.m. Their exhaustion is overwhelming, but they remain determined. Then, without evidence or prior indications, the police begin speculating whether Rachel might be pregnant. They question her boyfriend Manny, trying to determine if he might be involved, but there's no reason to suspect him. Taking matters into their own hands, Rachel's parents partner with a printing company to create hundreds of missing person posters. These are soon visible throughout the city. A woman contacts them, claiming to have seen a girl resembling Rachel at a train station the day after she disappeared. The girl, she says, was with 2 other females, but the lead turns out to be a false alarm. Another sighting comes in days later, this time from a person who says they saw Rachel with a man who had blonde hair. Despite Elizabeth and Michael's increasing desperation, the police resist releasing a public statement. Officers insist it's still too soon, believing Rachel will return on her own. When the authorities finally examine Rachel's room, they find a list. It includes names and dollar amounts. One entry says, "Runaways." The police conclude that this list indicates Rachel planned to leave voluntarily, but her parents are heartbroken. They know the list was nothing more than a record of holiday gifts Rachel had planned for her family. Runaways, they explain, is simply the name of a shoe brand Rachel loved, not a sign of her intentions. When Elizabeth contacts the police again, an officer tells her to give up the search for Rachel and instead focus on her two other daughters. Elizabeth is stunned by this lack of empathy. She knows that she won't give up the search for her daughter until Rachel is found. From then on, Elizabeth and Michael share responsibility. One of them always watches the home phone in case Rachel or a witness calls. While the police are looking for her in the city or distributing flyers, they search the crowds for her. On another day, they search the entire red light district of the city. On March 6th, 5 days after Rachel's disappearance, her parents reported a new suspicion to the police. In Rachel's circle of acquaintances, there had been a boy who had been behaving very suspiciously towards her in recent months. He watched her through her window and often left her gifts and notes. Rachel, however, didn't like this at all and felt strongly harassed by him. One day when she came out of the bathroom, the boy was suddenly standing in the house. One of her sisters had let him in. Rachel then freaked out, yelled at him and threatened to call the police if he showed up at her house again. Due to his aggressive behaviour, her parents think it's possible that he could have something to do with the revengeful disappearance. When they informed the police about it in the early afternoon, he replied that the idea was good, but that they had already used up enough resources this week searching for their daughter. This answer was too much for Elizabeth. She begins to cry and scream. She yells at the police officers to let her daughter die. As she leaves the station, she hits one of the police cars with her handbag, and Elizabeth's nervous breakdown actually seems to be taking effect. From then on, the police become significantly more cooperative. A very important turn of events, because just 1 day later, there is a shocking new development in the case of Rachel Barber. On March 7th, Alison Guberek contacts Rachel's parents. Alison is a friend of Rachel's sister and learned about her disappearance through the missing posters. She still remembers the day Rachel disappeared very clearly. An hour after Rachel said goodbye to her friends, Alison saw her on tram number 6. This stuck in her mind because Rachel didn't usually take that line. She saw her boarding the tram at around 6:40 p.m. at the intersection of High Street and Chapel Street, accompanied by an older girl. The two were familiar and happy, talking about money and how Rachel would like to adopt a cat. With Alison's help, the police created a composite sketch of the unknown woman. Rachel's parents recognized the girl in the picture but didn't know exactly who she was. Finally, Rachel's disappearance was made public and her parents were contacted by Australia's Most Wanted, a TV show about missing persons. March 10th was their wedding anniversary, but instead of enjoying a nice day together, they spent it answering the phone and searching for clues about their daughter's disappearance. With the help of the composite sketch, the police checked the list of names they had received from Rachel's parents. One name in particular caught his eye: Caroline Reed Roberts. She's 5 years older than Rachel, and she and her family were the Barabas' neighbours for years. Rachel and Caroline's parents were good friends, and Rachel's sister was the Barabas' best friend. Caroline's little sister at the time, Caroline often looked after Rachel and her sisters when their parents were away. Caroline had always shared a friendly bond with Rachel. Years ago, she had even taken a portrait of her for a school project. But when Caroline's family moved to Barras, nearly 18 kilometres away, the connection between the two families gradually faded. They rarely saw each other after that, until just a few weeks before Rachel disappeared. Michael had taken one of Rachel's sisters to a birthday party hosted by Caroline's younger sister. Rachel came along and waited in the car. Caroline noticed her there and walked over. The two chatted for a few minutes. Since they had always gotten along well, Michael thought nothing of it and never asked about their conversation. But 2 days after Rachel vanished, Caroline unexpectedly reached out to Elizabeth and Michael to express her sympathy. This surprised them, especially since she hadn't been in close contact for years. It was this moment that led them to include her name in the list they gave to police. Detectives soon noticed something important. At 20 years old, Caroline was now living in Pran, just 150 metres from the very train station where Rachel had last been seen with an unknown young woman. When investigators showed the composite sketch to Rachel's parents, they quickly recognised the face. It was Caroline. This led to another memory. Elizabeth remembered that Caroline had once called Rachel and spoken to her about a potential modelling opportunity. At the time, they assumed it had fallen through and didn't think much of it, but now, checking Rachel's phone records, they found that Caroline had called Rachel twice in the days leading up to her disappearance. This gave Rachel's parents some hope. Caroline had always acted like an older sister to Rachel. Perhaps Rachel had simply run away and was staying with her. The police decided to follow this lead. They began by visiting Caroline's workplace. There, they learned that Caroline had recently called in sick and had been unusually irregular with her attendance, something her co-workers found out of character. Her first absence? March 2nd, the very day Rachel disappeared. When Caroline did return to work, colleagues described her as withdrawn and pale. That day she made 2 calls from work to a transport company called Blue Circle Taxi Trucks. Later, she contacted her co-worker Donna Waters, to whom she had loaned some money, about $320. Caroline told Donna she needed it repaid immediately to cover moving costs for furniture she planned to send to her father's holiday home. Donna repaid the amount that day. The next morning, Caroline again called the transport company. Shortly afterward, she told her supervisor she was feeling unwell. He offered to drive her home at 10 a.m. Not long after, she mentioned to the same supervisor that one of her friends had recently gone missing, but claimed it wasn't unusual for this person to disappear, as she had supposedly done so before. On March 12th, police attempted to contact Caroline at her apartment to ask questions. No one answered the door. But a neighbour did share something strange. He recalled hearing someone crying late at night on March 2nd, the same night Rachel went missing. The sound came from the bathroom, which in Caroline's apartment directly bordered the neighbour's bedroom. Caroline's father also told police that he had visited her on March 2nd. He didn't notice anything strange except that Caroline kept her bedroom door shut the entire time, something she didn't usually do. Investigators then contacted the moving company Caroline had hired. The company reported that they had picked up and delivered what Caroline described as a statue, which had been tightly wrapped in 2 blankets, a rug, and placed inside an army-style bag. The movers never saw the statue itself. They had simply transported it to a property in Kilmore, a town outside the city. Then came another red flag. On March 10th, Caroline applied for a sizable loan, claiming it was to purchase a vehicle. But the bank rejected her application the next day because Caroline didn't hold a driver's license, raising questions about her actual intentions for the funds. Despite the rejection, she made 3 follow-up calls to the bank inquiring about the status. On that same day, Caroline also found out that the police had begun asking about her. She dismissed the concern to co-workers, claiming that it was probably just because she had once babysat for Rachel. From March 11th, she stopped going to work again, citing illness. When officers tried once more to reach her on March 12th, she again did not respond. Phone calls went unanswered. Authorities then attempted to gain entry to her apartment using spare keys from the real estate agent managing the property, but the keys didn't work. It appeared that the locks had recently been changed. At 6:10 p.m, police requested assistance from the fire department to gain entry. Access was made through an open bedroom window. What they found inside was concerning. All the rooms were heavily concealed, covered in dark fabrics or closed off, making it difficult to see clearly inside. Something was clearly off. The space is cluttered with empty bottles and take-out containers. Caroline herself is found unconscious on the floor of her bedroom. She suffers from epilepsy, and it appears she may have experienced a medical episode. Next to her is a pack of oatmeal, and something else catches the officer's attention. Her once blonde hair has been dyed a deep brown. There's no trace of Rachel in the apartment. But a detailed search reveals something unsettling. Officers find several documents bearing Rachel's name, official forms, applications and personal paperwork. They also find papers suggesting that Caroline had been planning a series of cosmetic procedures. The more they dig, the more puzzling it becomes. Caroline hadn't just shown admiration for Rachel, she had taken steps to assume her identity. There are signs she had filled out forms in Rachel's name, purchased clothing that would fit someone Rachel's size, but not her own, and had even made plans to relocate to Byron Bay. Her intentions were becoming clearer. She had not only looked up to Rachel, she had sought to become her. When Caroline regains consciousness at the hospital, investigators question her urgently. "Where is Rachel?" Caroline responds with chilling finality. Rachel is no longer alive. When asked how she knows this, Caroline admits that Rachel's remains had been in the apartment for 2 days, and she later transported them to her father's property. Authorities immediately head to the location she names. There, near the family burial area, they make a heartbreaking discovery. Rachel's body is found, and evidence confirms that she passed away on the day she vanished. The loss devastates her family. Elizabeth and Michael had clung to hope throughout the search, praying for a miracle. That hope was now shattered. But in their hearts, Rachel's presence remains undimmed. Though her time on earth was far too brief, her memory would live on, young, bright, and full of life. The tragedy stuns not just the family, but the wider community. Caroline had been like an older sister to Rachel. No one could have imagined that someone so familiar could be involved in something so serious. In the days and weeks that follow, investigators begin to piece together Caroline's story, and what they uncover helps explain the depth of her emotional struggle. Caroline was born on November 3rd, 1978, the eldest of 3 sisters. Her family was well off financially, but what the children lacked was emotional warmth and support. From a young age, Caroline faced difficult circumstances at home. Alongside her ongoing battle with epilepsy, she experienced emotional neglect, and this had a lasting impact. As a child, she became withdrawn. At school, she struggled to make friends and was often targeted by others. These experiences chipped away at her confidence and well-being. When Caroline was 16, her parents separated, an event that deeply affected her. She moved in with her mother, with whom she had a strained relationship. While her father had a strong personality and was sometimes harsh, Caroline had always felt closer to him. Living alone with her mother, who offered little affection or understanding, only deepened her isolation. She never received professional help or therapy, even though signs of emotional distress were clear. Caroline started writing letters to her father, pleas for support that went unanswered. In one note she wrote, "I really, really need help." But the help never came. Her mother knew about her struggles at school, yet nothing changed. Feeling abandoned, Caroline often turned to her diary, filling its pages with raw and painful reflections. In one entry she wrote that she felt like a troubled, tormented soul thrown into a world full of angels. Her sense of self-worth was so low that when asked to draw a picture of herself in art class, she handed in a blank page with the message, "This is me, I am nothing." In her teenage years, the entries grew darker. She wrote about how difficult each day had become and questioned how she had managed to keep going. Her words were heavy with sadness and frustration. She felt misunderstood, invisible, and burdened by the way others saw her. Caroline wrote, "The things people say about me keep getting worse. Eventually, there will be nothing left of me, just all the bad things others think I am. They keep building up, and I have no place to let them out. I feel like I'm going to explode." She was also harsh in her self-assessments, describing herself with unkind words and drawing images of herself surrounded by negative labels like useless, jealous, and ugly. Her diary became both a reflection of her inner world and a cry for help that no one answered. Her writings also mentioned Rachel, someone she viewed with a mixture of admiration and envy. Caroline described Rachel as naturally beautiful, highlighting her pale skin and striking green eyes. Even when Rachel was only 14, Caroline noted her presence and charisma. At one point, Caroline began writing a list titled "How to Change Yourself in 9 Weeks." It included goals to change the things she disliked about herself, both physically and emotionally. These entries give a glimpse into a mind desperate for transformation, battling deep self-doubt, and striving for something she believed she could never become. By this stage, Caroline's identity crisis has intensified. In her diary, she begins signing her entries with different names, as if she were desperately trying to escape her own. On one page, she jokingly calls herself the president of the I Hate Caroline Club, class of 1998. It reflects the intense internal conflict she carried. At one point, she contacts Rachel's sister under the pretense of needing birth dates for a school assignment. Unaware of Caroline's real intentions, Rachel's sister provides the information. In truth, Caroline was collecting data to model her new identity as closely as possible to Rachel's. Her admiration had crossed into fixation. Caroline had documented her conversations with Rachel, analysed how she spoke, and filled journal pages with descriptions of her. To Caroline, Rachel seemed like the epitome of beauty, talent, and social success, someone she longed to be. Tragically, this obsession led her to formulate a plan to take over Rachel's life completely. In entries later recovered from her journal, Caroline detailed a plan that involved gaining Rachel's trust, convincing her to participate in a confidential study, and eventually removing any trace of her. Notes referenced arranging a bank loan, hiring a moving truck, and deep cleaning her home. She also applied for an official birth certificate under the name Jem Southall, a new identity combining a name of her own, choosing with Rachel's mother's maiden name. Whether Caroline fully grasped the seriousness of her actions remains uncertain, but by March 13, 1999, the investigation had caught up with her. Authorities arrested Caroline and formally charged her with Rachel's death. In court, she appeared emotionally distant and frequently rocked back and forth in her seat. 2 days later, she made a partial confession. She admitted to disposing of Rachel's remains with assistance, though she denied responsibility for her passing and entered a plea of not guilty. Meanwhile, Rachel's family laid her to rest on March 24th. Her younger sister included a heartbreaking letter inside the memorial. It read, "To my beloved sister Rachel, I love you and I will never stop. You shouldn't have left us yet. We all know that. I miss you so much and hope we'll see each other again one day. Don't forget me and your family. I hope you didn't feel any pain. I will love you forever. Your little sister." The trial commenced in 2000. For the first time, Caroline publicly shared her version of events surrounding that tragic day. She testified that on February 28th she contacted Rachel and offered her a modest payment to participate in what she described as a confidential psychological study. Tempted by the opportunity to earn a little extra money, Rachel agreed. They met on March 1st and travelled together by train to Caroline's home. There, they shared a meal. Caroline noted that Rachel declined any alcohol, so she instead mixed a mild sedative into Rachel's food. Later, she introduced a meditation exercise, asking Rachel to close her eyes and think of positive memories. Caroline claimed that, in that moment, she had second thoughts, but believed she had already gone too far to stop. It was at this point, she said, that she acted in a way that led to Rachel's death. Forensic testimony later suggested that Rachel may have been unconscious at the time, which might have spared her from experiencing fear or pain. Still, many questions remain unanswered. For example, it's unclear whether the emotional outburst Caroline's neighbour heard that night came from her or someone else. The autopsy could not establish an exact time of death, leaving some gaps in the timeline. Caroline also admitted to keeping Rachel's body in her closet for 2 days. Under the guise of transporting a large decorative item, she contacted a moving company, who unknowingly delivered a bundled item to her father's property. There, she buried it near the resting place of a family pet. Her desire to become Rachel extended beyond imitation. Caroline had changed her appearance, dyed her hair, and even prepared for multiple cosmetic procedures. After the crime, she planned to move to a new city and begin life anew under Rachel's identity. Caroline's defense team struggled to understand her rationale. Her attorney stated, "In all my years, I've never encountered a more confusing and emotionally distant explanation for such serious actions. She remains closed off and won't allow us to fully understand her." The prosecution offered a clearer picture. What we see here is a case driven by extreme envy and emotional fixation. Caroline admired Rachel's appearance, popularity, and charisma. Her actions were an attempt to claim that life for herself. Eventually, Caroline was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. When delivering the verdict, the judge addressed the deeper themes of the case. "There are no perfect lives and no perfect people," he said, "and the pursuit of someone else's image at the expense of reality is a dangerous path. Every life is unique, valuable, and irreplaceable. No one has the right to take another's life, regardless of the pain they carry." Caroline's actions were not born of sudden rage, but of a long-standing and deeply unhealthy obsession. She believed Rachel had the kind of joyful, fulfilled life that she felt she could never have. And that belief became a dangerous delusion. Even if one feels some level of sympathy for Caroline, given her history of trauma and mental health struggles, it doesn't erase the fact that she made a choice that led to irreversible harm. In doing so, she didn't just take one life, she devastated an entire family. At the time, her world revolved around her own feelings, dreams, and desperation. But in the process, she failed to see the unimaginable consequences of her actions. In sentencing her, the judge acknowledged how emotionally complex this case was. But in the end, it was Rachel's life, taken far too soon, that weighed most heavily. The judgment, he said, was delivered in her name. Because Caroline was diagnosed only with depression and self-esteem challenges at the time, the court did not place her in a psychiatric facility. Later evaluations conducted during her incarceration suggested she may have had traits of a personality disorder, and the judge described her as someone who could potentially pose a risk to others if left untreated. Rachel's passing left a lasting mark not only on her loved ones, but also on the legal system in Melbourne. In the aftermath, police were required to improve their protocols and extend more consistent support to the families of missing persons, an important, if overdue, step forward. Rachel's mother, Elizabeth, expressed hope that this would ensure other families receive the help they need more quickly than she and her family once did. Rachel's close friend Manny eventually became a successful musician. In interviews, he's shared that many of his songs were inspired by Rachel's memory. Her impact on those who knew her has never faded. In October 2014, after serving 14 years of her 20-year sentence, Caroline was released early on parole. Elizabeth had made several attempts to appeal this release, driven by concern for her other daughter's safety. Some reports from that time suggest that Caroline may have still clung to elements of her past fixation. However, her post-release behaviour has remained legally uneventful. Elizabeth expressed the hope that Caroline would eventually find a new path, one rooted in healing and not in the shadows of the past. Until 2020, authorities monitored Caroline periodically. After that, however, regular oversight ended, which understandably worried Rachel's family. Elizabeth recalls the moment she saw Caroline again after her release. Her appearance, altered so significantly, reminded her of Rachel. "There she was," Elizabeth said, "those eyes, like Rachel's." And with that, we come to the end of today's video. Caroline's case is one that continues to raise haunting questions, not only about obsession and identity, but about what happens when mental health needs go unaddressed for too long. Even now, decades later, her fixation with Rachel seems chilling. One can only hope that today Caroline is living a life separate from her past, without causing harm to anyone else. What are your thoughts on the court's decision? Was 20 years enough? Should the sentence have been longer, or more focused on rehabilitation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction helps this channel grow and helps us bring more thoughtful content like this to a wider audience. When Rachel Owens was found on the side of the road in Ellis County, Kansas, on the night of April 25th, police and doctors couldn't believe she had been able to travel such a distance on her own. She was discovered by local farmers almost 3 hours after her disappearance. When the investigator asked her how she got to the road, the girl quietly replied, "I want to go home. Where is my mom? What exactly happened in those 3 hours, and who was behind this?" This shocking disappearance became the main mystery in one of the most notorious cases in Ellis County. Ellis County, Kansas, a quiet place with fields as far as the eye could see, and small farms scattered along old dirt roads. Life here flows slowly and predictably. There are almost no strange faces, and the news of Rachel Owens' disappearance seemed impossible. Here, April 25th, 2014, dawned cloudy and cool in the morning. There was a strong storm that damaged the power lines, and part of the county was without power at 3:55 p.m. As usual, the school bus stopped at the old intersection. The last to get off was Rachel Owens, daughter of local farmers John and Lisa Owens. The walk home was just over 1 kilometre along a straight road, a familiar path that takes about 15 minutes. But that day, Rachel didn't arrive home. Her disappearance marked the beginning of an investigation that would reveal unexpected and alarming events. The police reacted quickly. Half an hour after Lisa Owens' alarming call, officers were already at the intersection, but difficulties began immediately. The surveillance camera, the only one on this stretch of road, hadn't worked since the morning. The storm had knocked out the power, and the backup battery didn't activate. Without the recording, the police were left with no clear idea of what happened on the road after the bus left. The first witness accounts appeared at 4:12 p.m., 2 neighbouring farmers. Independently of each other, they heard a car drive by with an unusually raspy engine, but their descriptions of the vehicle didn't match. The first described it as a dirty, dark green SUV with a high body. The second was certain it was an old, black or dark-coloured pickup truck that was going too fast for a local road. The officers began inspecting the area about 200 metres from where Rachel was last seen. Detective James Cran noticed a solitary tyre track, photographed it, and called in forensic experts a few minutes later. Later it began to rain again. Aware of the threat of losing evidence, the officers covered the track with plastic film, securing it with rocks. However, the rain intensified, and despite their efforts, the water partially eroded the soil around the track. The experts arrived quickly, but they could no longer obtain a complete impression. The photograph taken by Detective Cran remained the only useful image of the track of the vehicle involved in Rachel's disappearance. The first suspicions of the police focused on school bus driver Mark Larson, 57. Larson was the last adult Rachel saw. During the interrogation, he calmly explained that he noticed her drop her beloved pink switchblade when she turned to say goodbye, but he ignored her and walked away. Mark spoke directly and confidently, but the officers noticed he was nervous, constantly repeating the same words. Despite their doubts, Larson's alibi was confirmed by his colleagues and footage from other cameras along the road. However, questions remained about him. The second suspect was farmer Byron Cole, a neighbour of the Owens family, known for his secretive nature during the period from 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon. He was the only one on the road near his farm. Cole claimed he was shooting at coyotes during that time. They immediately checked the gun but found nothing suspicious. However, no one could confirm his words since Cole lived alone and there were no witnesses. Detectives inspected his house and car but found nothing. Evidence indicating his involvement was limited and the police could make no progress. At 6 in the evening, the police conducted an additional search of the bus Rachel was travelling on. They found her pink pocket knife in the luggage compartment. It had no fingerprints of the driver or other strangers, only Rachel's. Larson continued to insist that he saw the knife fall from the girl's hand near the exit. He couldn't explain how it got to the trunk, but after a brief check, it was discovered that Rachel had already lost this knife several times, and her parents confirmed this to the investigation. This lead turned out to be false, although some questions to the bus driver remained unanswered. At 6:50 in the evening, almost 3 hours after Rachel disappeared, hunters were returning along the highway from a neighbouring town. It was almost dark, visibility was poor, and the road was barely lit by the headlights of the old Ford. As the couple rounded a bend, they spotted a motionless figure in the trees beside the road. At first they feared it was roadkill, but as they drew nearer, they realized it was a child. It was Rachel Owens. They braked hard and jumped out. Rachel was covered in mud and had minor scrapes on her face. Her clothes were torn and she was breathing heavily, shivering from cold and shock. The couple gently wrapped her in an old blanket and hurried her to Ellis County Hospital. Throughout the drive, Rachel whispered in a barely audible voice, "I want to go home. Where's my mum?" The police arrived shortly after them. Detective James Cran entered the emergency room just as a nurse finished applying a few stitches. He approached quietly and asked, "Rachel, can you tell me how you came to be on the road?" The girl met his gaze with frightened, exhausted eyes and repeated in a faint whisper, "I want to go home. Where is my mom?" That was the only response they received that night. The 3 hours between her disappearance and discovery remained a mystery. With Rachel safe in care, the investigation shifted focus to those who might have been involved. Detective Cran's first person of interest was school bus driver Mark Larson. They weren't looking to rush to judgment, but they needed answers. With Rachel safe in care, the investigation shifted focus to those who might have been involved. Detective Cran's first person of interest was school bus driver Mark Larson. They weren't looking to rush to judgment, but they needed answers. The team began by verifying Larson's activities that afternoon. When Cran reviewed Larson's route sheet, he noticed an unexplained 12-minute gap between stops, highly unusual on a schedule that was normally logged minute by minute by the bus's GPS. To confirm, Cran requested the GPS data directly from the bus's onboard system. It showed a complete stop beside a vacant lot, roughly halfway between the two stops, an isolated spot known locally as a dumping ground for old farm equipment. Next, investigators dug into Larson's background. A year earlier, he'd been disciplined for speeding dangerously near Annis Elementary, an incident documented but chalked up to personal urgency. While that alone didn't prove wrongdoing, Cran flagged it as a possible pattern. Called in for a more detailed interview, Larson was asked why his bus had paused at that empty lot. He explained that he'd felt a strong vibration in the steering and discovered a flat rear tyre, which he said he changed himself on the spot. When pressed for a work order or any paperwork, he admitted he'd handled it personally with no service record. Yet upon inspection, the bus showed no fresh marks on the spare tyre or tools, contradicting his account. Despite these inconsistencies, Larson maintained his story, meeting Cran's gaze with steady calm. Meanwhile, the team returned to the bus where Rachel's pink switchblade had been found earlier, re-evaluating every clue in hopes of breaking the case open. The situation became more complicated, and the investigators' suspicions only intensified. To clarify matters, Detective Cran called Lisa Owens in for questioning. Rachel's mother, Lisa, appeared distraught and confused, but remained cooperative, answering every question. When the detective placed the insurance policy form before her, Lisa looked genuinely surprised. She insisted she'd never heard of such a policy and hadn't signed anything like that. Yet when Cran pointed to the signature line, Lisa fell silent. Her own signature stared back at her from the page. She repeated that she must have signed it among a stack of farm documents that David handed her, but she couldn't be certain. Despite her protestations, the convenience of her claimed ignorance weighed heavily on the officers' minds. With a possible financial motive now under consideration, the team hunted for any signs of staging. Phone logs, text messages and computer histories from both Owen's parents were scoured. Nothing. No drafts of ransom notes, no searches on obscuring GPS signals, no hints of premeditation. Left with no direct proof, the detectives reluctantly shelved the theory of a faked disappearance and returned their focus to the hospital, where Rachel's condition had finally stabilized enough for an interview. Seated in a quiet room, Rachel looked small and tired, but spoke clearly when Cran asked whether she'd seen anyone she knew in the vacant lot. Without hesitation, she shook her head. "No one of ours was there," she said firmly. "I didn't see anybody I know." Cran pressed gently, asking if she might have been too scared to notice, but Rachel repeated unequivocally that she had been alone. Her words deepened the mystery. On one hand, the Owens' shaky finances and that oversized insurance policy suggested motive. On the other, Rachel's account ruled out any immediate family involvement. Just as the puzzle seemed to stall again, a lab report arrived, confirming that the chloroform residue found on Rachel's clothing had been purchased not by Larson, but by the Owens' neighbour, Byron Cole. Cole was a 71-year-old lifelong resident who kept mostly to himself. Early the next morning, Detective Cran and 2 deputies drove out to his farm. In his cluttered kitchen, Cole listened calmly as Cran laid out the findings. He did not deny buying chloroform. Instead, he claimed he used it to anaesthetize calves during farm procedures. His tone was steady and he seemed genuinely unbothered by their questions. But when Cran later spoke with the county veterinarian, the story unravelled. The vet explained that chloroform hadn't been used in livestock care for decades. It was deemed too dangerous and had been banned on all regional farms. Veterinary procedures were performed under the vet's direct supervision using approved anaesthetics, and no one, including Cole, had ever requested chloroform. Now each lead pulled Detective Cran in a different direction. Larson's clean pickup and unexplained 12-minute pause, the Owens' mysterious policy, Rachel's lonely ordeal, and Cole's inexplicable chloroform purchase. The case was far from solved, but for the first time the circle of suspects had narrowed, and every revelation hinted that the answer lay hidden in the gaps between their statements. That evening, forensic teams completed a detailed sweep of the bus's luggage compartment and uncovered a surprising item, a neatly kept shooting log in Byron Cole's handwriting. The diary recorded 2 single shots at 4:30 p.m. and 4:35 p.m. on April 25th. Precisely the window when Rachel had vanished. At first glance, Cole's entries seemed to corroborate his initial claim of firing at coyotes that afternoon. Detective James Cran ordered the farmer's rifle sent for ballistic testing. Meanwhile, officers inspected Cole's fields and recovered 2 bullets matching the caliber of his firearm. Yet, curiously, no spent casings lay nearby. When pressed, Cole insisted he always retrieved his brass to keep the farm tidy. an explanation the detectives noted but remained unconvinced by. The lab report arrived late the next day, and it upended everything. Despite Cole's claim of firing that morning, forensic analysis detected no gunpowder residue inside the barrel. In fact, microscopic examination confirmed the rifle hadn't discharged on April 25th at all. Cole's alibi, once backed by soil samples and his own journal, now lay in tatters. His version of events was fatally undercut, yet Cran still lacked direct evidence tying him to Rachel's disappearance. Undeterred, Detective Cran broadened the inquiry to Rachel's school circle. It was there that Miss Jennifer White, Rachel's third-grade teacher at Ellis County School, quietly reached out. In a hushed corridor exchange, she handed Cran a worn notebook, Rachel's own diary. White explained she'd found it in the classroom right after Rachel went missing, but only now realized its potential importance. With the diary in hand, the investigation turned inward to untold thoughts and observations penned by Rachel herself. Every scratched-out word and heartfelt entry might now hold the clue that would finally connect the scattered pieces: Cole's broken alibi, the Owens family's tangled motives, and the silent hours Rachel could not explain. Detective Cran knew the case stood at its most pivotal point yet. The story was about to shift from what people said happened to what Rachel had actually written. Several days later, Miss Jennifer White realized the diary might hold crucial clues. Rachel's notebook, written in a careful childish script, was handed over, and Detective Cran immediately began studying each page. Most entries were typical for a 9-year-old, but one, dated about 2 weeks before her disappearance, made him sit up. No witness had ever mentioned such a vehicle or described anyone like that. Cran knew these details. An old, dented Ford and a rough-looking neighbour could be the first real lead. He summoned Lisa Owens to the station. Rachel's mother looked puzzled when shown the diary excerpt. "I've never noticed a dented truck near our house or the bus stop," she said, lowering her eyes in genuine surprise. But when Cran asked John Owens, Rachel's father, the answer was different. "I did own an old green Ford F-150 back in 2008, with a dent on the passenger door, and it had a grain elevator sticker on the tailgate. I sold it years ago and have no idea who drives it now." Armed with that description, the department issued a county-wide alert, sharing an artist's composite of the truck and its distinctive sticker. The tip line lit up with over 40 calls in 24 hours. Reports of similar trucks at convenience stores, farm driveways, even parked by the school. But every single sighting proved a dead end, costing precious time. Detective Cran realized public appeals could flood the investigation with noise, so he refocused on the elevator sticker, a far more specific clue. He obtained records from the county's only grain elevator and quickly learned that, in recent years, only one green Ford F-150 had ever carried their official decal, registered to a local stonemason named Clayton Reeves. Reeves was virtually unknown to police. He lived alone on a modest plot, kept to himself, and had no criminal history or financial troubles. Yet here was a solid, unexpected lead, the very model and sticker Rachel had feared. With a warrant in hand, Cran and 2 deputies drove out to Reeves's property. The man met them at the gate, calm but clearly surprised. As the investigation shifted once again, Cran felt the tides turning. This time the clues had come directly from Rachel's own words. The real search for her abductor was finally underway. Despite his outward composure, detectives soon uncovered evidence that cast doubt on Clayton Reeves's explanation. Carlos Mendez, a grain elevator worker, told officers he'd seen Reeves at the service hangar on the afternoon of April 25th, vigorously washing his truck with bleach so strong the odour carried for yards. It was far more thorough than Mendez had ever observed before. Detective Cran ordered an immediate forensic sweep of the hangar area. Under a nearby drain grate, experts recovered 2 items of interest: canvas fibres caught on the grate's edge, and a small residue that laboratory tests later identified as a common human blood type. Surveillance footage from the warehouse confirmed Reeves loading a large shovel into his truck that same afternoon, then driving off. When Reeves was brought in for questioning, he insisted he'd been cleaning the truck for sale and that the bleach was simply to make the paint gleam. Yet, police found no sale listings in local papers or online, nor had any dealerships been approached. His explanation, while polite and calm, did little to ease suspicion. Reeves's attorney countered that, as a small farm operator, his client sometimes hauled livestock carcasses, and residual animal blood might have ended up in the grate. Investigators checked slaughterhouse logs and farm contracts. Nothing tied Reeves to any recent transport, weakening the defence's claim. That evening, a rapid DNA screen on the grate residue yielded a partial match to Rachel Owens's sample. While not conclusive enough for charges, it was the strongest lead yet, suggesting Rachel's presence near Reeves's truck on the night she vanished. Armed with this circumstantial but compelling evidence, Detective Cran and his team finally felt they had identified the person most likely involved. Though they still lacked definitive proof, they now had a clear suspect, and the investigation moved swiftly toward its next phase. However, the uncertainty surrounding the DNA analysis results kept tensions high and prevented the investigative team from declaring any breakthroughs. Detective James Cran knew they were close, but close wasn't enough. Not in a case this emotionally charged. They needed irrefutable evidence to secure justice for Rachel Owens and bring resolution to a town still on edge. Doubts about Clayton Reeves had long since turned into near certainty. His odd behaviour, inconsistent alibis, the partial DNA match and eyewitness accounts all pointed toward him. But it was still circumstantial. The team's goal now was clear: find something definitive. Early the next morning, Cran ordered a second, more intensive forensic sweep of Reeves's green Ford F-150. This time the team discovered a folded black tarp in one corner of the truck bed. On the surface it looked ordinary, just another farmer's gear. But the smell of damp earth and clay clung to the material. As the tarp was unrolled, investigators noticed worn, irregular cuts along its edges, suggesting it had been hastily trimmed or altered. Suspicious, they rushed it to the lab for immediate testing. The results came back quickly, and with them a breakthrough. Soil particles and grass spores embedded in the tarp were an exact match to samples taken from the remote site where Rachel Owens's footprints had been found. But the most damning discovery lay within the folds, a faint, nearly invisible impression of a small hand. Forensic analysis confirmed the handprint matched Rachel's size and characteristics. It was no longer just a hunch. This tarp had been with Rachel, and it had later returned to Reeves's truck. Armed with this, the team called Clayton Reeves back in for questioning. As before, he was calm, almost too calm, and this time he arrived prepared with his shift card data from April 25th. It recorded his presence on site at the grain elevator until 6:45 p.m., theoretically ruling him out as a suspect during the critical time window. But Detective Cran wasn't convinced. The system only recorded electronic swipes. There were no cameras to confirm Reeves's physical presence. The possibility of someone else using his card or Reeves leaving the premises undetected remained open. To dig deeper, Cran sought witness corroboration. One co-worker, Tom Hudson, said he vaguely recalled seeing Reeves around 5 p.m. but couldn't place him specifically, just that he'd seen him around. The vague memory wasn't enough. Then something unexpected happened. Hours later, Cran met with Hudson again, hoping to clarify his statement. During their talk, Hudson remembered he had taken several photographs for a work report that day. Checking his phone, he pulled up a photo taken at precisely 3:40 p.m. It showed the elevator yard, and parked prominently in the background was Reeves's pickup. But there was something vital missing. The tarp. The bed of the truck was empty. This seemingly minor detail spoke volumes. If the tarp wasn't in the vehicle at 3:40 p.m, but was later found there with soil and Emily's handprint, it had to have been placed there closer to the time of her disappearance. And that timeline directly contradicted Reeves's alibi. It was a turning point. The photograph created a time marker that dismantled the defense and gave the investigators their strongest connection yet. Physical evidence tied Rachel Owens, recovered from a vehicle that hours before had been empty, and whose owner had no legitimate explanation for the tarp's sudden appearance. The trap was closing, and Clayton Reeves was running out of places to hide. This final stretch of the investigation was critical, not just legally but emotionally, for a community that had waited anxiously for closure. The discovery of the tarp had tilted the balance. Now it was clear. Clayton Reeves had lied. The tarp had been placed in the truck, his supposed presence at the elevator, which contradicted his timeline and deepened suspicions. Still, Detective Cran knew better than to rush. Even with the mounting pile of evidence, circumstantial though it was, there remained a possibility, however slim, that someone else had planted the tarp. What they needed now was an irrefutable linchpin, a piece of truth that couldn't be twisted, denied or doubted. That proof came quietly, just after dawn on May 6th. A sealed envelope arrived at Cran's office from the forensics lab. It was thin, barely a few pages, but its contents hit with the force of a thunderclap. On the blade of the shovel recovered from the back of Clayton Reeves's pickup truck, the lab had found a belonging to Rachel Owens. Not partial, not possible. There was no more room for escape. The implications were crushing. The shovel, used to dig the shallow hole Emily had been temporarily buried, now directly tied Reeves to the crime scene, not just with inference, but with biological certainty. And yet, as if that wasn't enough, another revelation followed. Analysts combing through the elevator's digital logs discovered that Reeves's access card had been scanned, a highly unusual and suspicious pattern. Investigators concluded that these repeated swipes were an intentional attempt to create an artificial timeline, a phantom alibi. He wasn't on the premises, he was hiding what he'd just done. With this final puzzle piece in place, the timeline of April 25th was reconstructed with chilling clarity. Rachel Owens had stepped off her school bus like she did every day. Clayton Reeves, someone she knew, someone who had always seemed like just a quiet man from the neighborhood, was waiting in his green Ford F-150. He offered her a ride, assuring her it'd be faster than walking. Trusting him, Rachel got in, but almost immediately something felt off. The route changed. The tone in Reeves's voice shifted. Rachel asked where they were going. When she resisted, frightened, Reeves shouted at her. He grabbed her so forcefully that she lost consciousness. Panicked and now trapped in his own impulse, Reeves drove to a remote, muddy field just outside the county line. There, at 5:10 p.m, he took the shovel from his truck and began to dig. The earth was soft from recent rains, which made the task easier. When he was done, he laid Emily in the shallow hole, covered her in dirt and fled, convinced she wouldn't survive and that no one would ever know. Rachel Owens did survive. The damp, loosely packed soil made it possible for her to push her way out. Dazed, coughing and covered in earth, she crawled to the road, where she was found miraculously alive by the Hunter family nearly 2 hours later. The final arrest came on May 9th. Police descended on Reeves's farm just after sunrise. The moment he saw them, he bolted for his truck. He reached behind the seat for a shotgun, but the officers, expecting resistance, acted first. A stun gun brought Reeves down before he could fire a shot. His trial began several months later and captivated Ellis County. The defense argued panic, not premeditation. that Reeves had simply been terrified when Rachel lost consciousness, and that his actions were a misguided response, not a deliberate crime. But the jury didn't buy it. The timeline, the tarp, the manipulated alibi, the DNA, it was too much to ignore. The county court delivered its verdict. Clayton Reeves was found of the kidnapping and attempted murder of Rachel Owens. He was sentenced to, with no possibility of parole, for 45 years. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Rachel Owens, sitting between her mother and father, didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood, then walked slowly out of the courthouse, sunlight pouring down on her face. Justice, at long last, had been served. If you liked the video, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing, and don't forget to activate the bell so you never miss a new upload from True Crime. Krish.